Welcome to Love Your Library, Hampshire Libraries podcast. I'm Kate Price-McCarthy, here with my co-host, Hattie Dulac. Hi, Hattie.
Hi, Kate. Happy to be here as always. And need to ask, are you reading anything good at the moment?
Well, I've just finished reading the latest Anthony Horowitz, The Twist of the Knife, which was such a pleasure. Regular podcast listeners might remember my conversation with the lovely Anthony Horowitz when he talked about this Hawthorne series of books. And I must say I'm quite relieved because I wasn't such a fan of the third one in the series, but this one was an absolute delight. So great sigh of relief. I'm now really looking forward to the fifth one. And how about you? Reading anything good?
Yeah, I'm reading a book called Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, which was a massive international bestseller in 2020. It's a book about a young Black woman's relationship with the mother of a child that she babysits. And it really sort of explores the dynamics of privilege in an interesting way. I think one of the things that made it so popular and so critically acclaimed is the writing style, which is very conversational in a way and very colloquial, which is nice to read. I think Kylie Reid's been hailed as perhaps a similar figure to Sally Rooney in that sense, that the language is very kind of fluid.
Some of the themes you're talking about slightly reminding me of Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, which is a book we talked about a while ago.
And thank you to our supporter BorrowBox, the library app that lets you download ebooks and audiobooks straight to your phone or tablet.
Now, today's episode of Love Your Library brings you an interview with Ali Hazelwood. Now, what a character Ali was. She was such a lovely person to chat to. In fact, it took us a while to get to the interview because she was busy checking to see that I was coping with the sad news about the Queen. And then we were talking about the corgis, and then we were talking about her mother's risotto. And so it took us ages to get down to talking about the book. But she's a fascinating character because, well, her pen name is Ali Hazelwood. She is obviously Italian originally. And she's actually a neuroscientist. And she was, until very recently, a professor of neuroscience. And the people that she works with in the laboratory had no idea that she had this alter ego as a romantic comedy writer. And so I kind of thought she was a bit like the Eleanor Ferranti of neuroscience, with the secret life of a writer. But she's now become so successful that she's actually put her neuroscience to one side, as you'll hear about when she chats.
That sounds so interesting. I think it's amazing how someone can use both sides of their brain. And maybe Ali would be the best person to talk to about exactly how that happens.
You're quite right. Anyway, yes, we'll be hearing my interview with her in a little while.
And then later on, we'll be talking to Lily, who works across a range of our libraries, about her recommended read, Margaret Atwood's The Heart Goes Last.
Many of our listeners will, of course, know Margaret Atwood from her infamous feminist dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale. But in our chat with Lily, we're talking about a few of Atwood's other works and also titles she's inspired. With a back catalogue of bestsellers, it's amazing she's been able to stay relevant to audiences across the decades she's been writing.
It's no surprise then that she's the pick for Hampshire Libraries Author of the Month for September. And you can head over to our blog to find out more about our Author of the Month collections. And of course, as always, check our show notes for all the books that we mention in today's episode.
But before we get talking to Lily, here's our interview with the wonderful Ali Hazelwood. Before we play this interview, unfortunately, we did have a few technical issues and the sound quality isn't the greatest. So many apologies for this dodgy soundtrack. But we didn't want you to miss out on a really great chat with a wonderful author. But just wanted to say we were sorry that it might be a bit hard to hear some of Ali's responses. So thank you, Ali, so much for joining me to talk about your lovely new book, Love on the Brain. So can I start by asking you to tell us a bit more about it?
Of course. Love on the Brain is the story of a neuroscientist who is selected to lead a very important project at NASA that has to do with building these really cool helmets for astronauts. And she is originally over the moon because her career has been like hitting a rough patch, and she's been stalling. So she's like, okay, this is where I come in and I fix everything, and my life is going to be so much better. And then she finds out that the person she's going to have to lead her project with is Levi, who is her grad school arch nemesis. And, the book is, of course, a romance novel. So it's the story of them figuring out their differences, figuring out how to work on this project together, and, of course, falling in love.
Exactly. So it's one of those classic love stories that we know and love so much, where the two people start off seemingly to hate each other. Now, before I read this book, I had heard it described as a STEMinist rom-com, which did kind of bring a smile to my face before I'd even begun it. So for those people who might not be as familiar with the term STEM, would you perhaps explain what a STEMinist romantic fiction book might be?
So I think STEMinist is a sort of like portmanteau, and I don't know who came up with it. I know that I remember hearing about it back when I was in grad school, and then I forgot about it, and then my editor at Berkeley, my US editor Sarah, kind of reminded me of the term, and she's been using it for marketing, and I love it. So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, and it's basically actually, I have to say that the term has been evolving. I think a lot of people say STEAM now. I don't even know what the A stands for, but just to be more inclusive of a bunch of other disciplines, and which makes total sense. But the idea of STEMinist is basically, the way I see it, and I hope I am correct, is everything that regards women in STEM fields that are usually male dominated. And yeah, I like this term. I think it's cute, and it's kind of easy to understand what the book is about, just from the term.
And your background, like the book's main character, B, is a neuroscientist, and I'm slightly in awe of the fact that you're actually a professor of neuroscience. Am I right in saying that?
I was until a couple of weeks ago. I actually am taking a year off to focus on writing. But yeah.
Okay, well, I just find that so amazing. That's just wonderful. I understand you see this book as a kind of love letter to neuroscience. So what is it about neuroscience you love so much?
I think for me, the reason why I always gravitated toward neuroscience is that I always felt, I especially was interested in why people are different from each other. I always felt and not to get too deep or too sad or sappy, but I always felt there was something weird about me. I remember growing up, I was why there are these things that seem so easy to others and are so hard to me? Why there are these things that I just cannot seem to do? Why am I different from, my friends? Why am I different from other people in my family? And I think that's why I decided to gravitate toward neuroscience. I just wanted to know more about individual differences. And neuroscience is a very interesting way to explain it. Not that we are what our brain is. There is a lot of, there are a lot of studies, a lot of literature that actually, looks at how genetics and epigenetics and the collaboration between nature and nurture actually shape who we are. But the brain was just such a fascinating organ for me since the very beginning. So that's what I like about neuroscience. The idea that I can maybe predict someone's behavior, parse a little bit of what someone is, what their choices are going to be based on the structure and function of their brain. Or at least that's what was fascinating to me from from an academic point of view. That's why I got into neuroscience. And I think I I talk a little bit about it in the book. I kind of gave B, the main character, the same passion for neuroscience, which was fun. It was like, it's really fun to like infuse your love for something into something you write.
Yeah, no, I get it completely, and that passion comes across. I really love the moment when B's doing these almost like seem to be like magic tricks with the with the astronauts, where she's playing around with neuroscience and she's totally blowing their minds. Is that really something you can do as a neuroscientist?
100%. Yes.
That's amazing.
And I was very much like, I remember the first time I saw that, I think I was an undergrad still. And that was my reaction. Like, I was literally writing my reaction to the first time that I saw someone like interrupt speech. So basically the idea is that what you can do is you can use this transcranial magnetic stimulation, where you are basically sending this magnetic and therefore electric impulse to a person's brain, which I know sounds really invasive and really scary, but it's all very safe. And you can disrupt the functioning of little parts of the brain. And because you can map certain functions of the brain to certain locations and certain systems, if you disrupt those systems, then people are going to like do things that they don't realize they're doing, or they're going to be unable to do other things. And one is, if you stimulate Broca's area, which is part of the system that is important to produce language in the brain, then people are going to have a hard time speaking. And I remember being in the lab, and this is probably not something that the IRB and the university would want to know, so I'm not going to give details, but like me and the other students, so we would like do it on each other. And it was like so much fun. Mm-hmm. Or another thing was like, we would make each other's fingers twitch. Like we would stimulate each other's motor cortex to force each other to move. And that was like so much fun for me. And it was such a tangible proof that our brain is up there doing things all the time. I loved it. It's not the research that I ended up doing myself. I do more like neuroimaging than neurostimulation, but it was incredibly interesting for me, and I thought it was fascinating. So yeah. It's really nice when people say, "Oh, I like the science in the book," because I'm like, me too.
Yeah, well, it is. It's such a wonderful mix that you've got all this fascinating science stuff, and yet you can't get away from the fact that it's a very, very funny and incredibly romantic. And perhaps surprisingly for a romantic novel, Marie Curie is a theme that runs through this book, because she's such a major role model for B in her work and also in her romantic life. And B has this Twitter feed of what would Marie Curie do? And it's a wonderful link to romantic stories like, I think you mentioned another film, but I immediately thought of The Shop Around the Corner. And so what gave you that idea for involving Marie Curie in this story in the first place? She's almost like a frame for it.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know what's funny? I got the idea from Never Have I Ever, which is this amazing, I want to say Netflix series. It's produced by Mindy Kaling, and the main character, Debbie, is an Indian American teenager who is she has some anger issues, and because she has some anger issues, because of how her personality is, she's just this very impulsive person. The framing device for the series is, the narrator for the series is John McEnroe, who is someone, I don't know anything about tennis, but he apparently was this very famous tennis player a couple of decades ago, who was mostly known for his temper. So the idea is that they have this thing in common, and seeing him narrate the life story of someone who has nothing really in common with him except for his temper, and seeing the two of them relate so well was so incredibly funny for me. And I remember being like, wouldn't it be funny? I was watching the first season of this show. Now we're on season 3, and it's just getting better, honestly. The show is a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece. The show was giving me so much joy. I watched it multiple times, and I remember as I was writing the book and watching the show, thinking, who would be the narrator for Bee's life? Like, wouldn't it be fun if I was able to do something like that? And that's kind of how I remember starting from, Marie Curie's dress, because she got married in her lab gown, because at the time, she didn't have a lot of money and her husband didn't have a lot of money, and she was a very practical person. So she was like, hey, why don't you just buy me a lab gown, and then I'm going to get married in it, and then I'm going to be able to work in it. And I remember it kind of started like that. I remember writing that snippet and then going back and kind of like adding in a bunch of Marie Curie fun facts. There is a movie with one of my favorite actresses, actually, Rosamund Pike, who plays, she was Jane in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and she's like, it's a biopic on Marie Curie's life. And then I was reading up on her life. So I didn't know very much about Marie Curie before the book, but then I really fell in love. Like, she was incredibly resilient, incredibly passionate. She had this amazing relationship with other female scientists, with her husband, with her sister. She truly got over a bunch of like hurdles. We say it's hard to be women in STEM right now, and it is, but like her life, like the passion, the commitment that she had to what she studied and how far she came truly speaks to her determination and her brilliance. So yeah, I became myself a Marie Curie stan in the process of writing the book.
Love it. Yeah, quite right. So why do you think it is that academia, and more specifically STEM academia, why does it make such a good setting, do you think, for a romantic story?
I think it's always fun for me to read about people who are very competent and very good at what they do. And to me, this is true in general. Like, one of my favorite books that I've read recently was On the Hustle by Adriana Herrera. It's not out yet. I read an arc, but like, the main character is so competent. Like, her job is an interior decorator, and what she does is she takes people's favorite books and she decorates their room based on that book, like based on the vibe of the book. And that is a competency that I do not have. And like, reading about this person, like, she really goes into detail about like the type of things that she would choose and the type of furniture and where she gets her inspiration. And reading about someone being good at this thing that I don't know anything about I love them so much, like, for many reasons, but also because of this amazing competency of this woman. And I think maybe that's why people like to read about women scientists, because, it's usually you're celebrating, like, you're taking someone who is really passionate, really good at something, and you're showing them in their element, being really good and passionate at something, and in the process finding love. So I think there is a little bit of like wish fulfillment and a little bit of just like competence gig, I'm gonna say.
Yeah, and I think you're right too, and that if it gives you an insight into a world that is completely new to you, then it's fascinating. And I guess if it's a world you already know about, it's lovely to read about it as well. So I guess it can work both ways. One thing I thought I might mention is that there are quite some racier aspects to this book. I don't know whether that's an expression. Yes, that obviously does work in America too, and that must have been really fun to write. But I also think I was looking through one of the reviews and it said, "Oh, this is quite good," she said, "because I love the racier bit, but if somebody didn't, then they're in kind of a chunk that if you don't want to, if that's not your thing, you can go, okay, well, I'll just miss out that." I know. I was very happy to read it, but it does give people that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can easily skip the sex scenes, and like, I don't think you would lose the meaning of what is happening in the rest of the book. So I definitely love writing them, and when I read books, I love reading sex scenes. But I understand it's not everyone's cup of tea. So totally.
Yeah. Now, you talk about, as I mentioned, about this book being like a love letter to neuroscience, but you've also described it as a hate letter to something about that's standardized testing. In particular, is this thing, the GRE test that graduates have to take in North America in order to get into grad schools. Now, it's not an issue you go into a huge amount in the book, but it is a really interesting thought that I hadn't really thought about because of how it can cause discrimination in some way. So maybe could you just touch on that a little bit, because I did think it was an interesting topic.
Of course. So the GRE is, the GRE, the SATs. I personally, as a grad student in STEM, what I had to take to start grad school was the GRE, but like there are similar things that the SATs and the ACTs, I think, are to enter college. Then there are other types like the MCATs, that's to start medical school, and the LSATs, that's to start law school. So basically, America is hugely dependent on standardized testing, and these tests are a couple $100 a pop, and you're gonna have to travel to the testing center. You can't take them from home. They are usually timed, and there are very few accommodations that are available for people that are, neurodivergent or that have issues that might prevent them from testing. And there are a bunch of ways where you can prepare for the test. And I want to stress that you're preparing for the test. You're not preparing and learning knowledge that is going to help you in grad school or in your life. You are preparing and studying on how to work and take the test successfully. So you're basically learning a bunch of different tricks. There are books that you can take. There are tests. There are private tutors. And they are very expensive, right? So what is going on basically is that the people who usually succeed at this type of testing are the people who are able to afford the prep material and, the prep process that usually comes up before the test, or they are the people who are able to take the test over and over again until they have the highest scores. It really becomes, like so many other things in life, one of those people who have more money are going to do better just because they have more opportunities. There have been several studies that have found that, your financial situation, your access to resources are very high predictors of your score in this test. And what is most interesting to me is that there have been several studies that have shown that there is no real predictive values, and that these tests are not really telling us who is really going to do better in grad school, because the type of skills that you need to go through grad school are not really the type of skills that are measured by these tests. So there has been a movement that has been growing more and more that is trying to kind of like abandon these tests because they are seen as like instruments of gatekeeping that are making academia even less diverse than it already is, and it's already a predominantly white, often predominantly male environment. I myself was a professor while I was writing the book, and I could see how many people within my department hated the GRE, but then at the same time, the university was pushing for us to use it, or it would be very hard to stop using it. We actually stopped using it last year. That was one of the good things of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. The pandemic really helped, like, kind of with a bunch of changes, just because it became so logistically hard for people to get to the testing center or, make testing appointments. So people were like, you know what, we're just going to stop asking for the test, which was great. Yeah, that's something that I am very passionate about. I could literally, like, it's my soapbox topic. So it was really just nice to be able to include it in the book and say how much I hate it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, it's to be able to have that thread as a storyline within this book is just, for it to fit perfectly in a rom-com is just wonderful. So yeah, I salute you for doing that. Now this, I believe this is like your second full-length book after your first book, The Love Hypothesis, was such a massive success. So what is it you think that readers connected with in such a big way with that book? What can you give a reason for why it hit the right notes at the right time?
I wish I knew, because then I could replicate it, but I really don't. I'm not sure. I think a part of it was that it was a book that was like just a happy ending type of book that came out at a moment where a lot of people were looking for happy endings type of things, because, it's been a tough couple of years. I think maybe that's it. A lot of it is really just, and I promise I'm not trying to be false modest or to minimize the books. I think it's a good book. I like it. I wrote it. But I also think that so much of it is just really chance. I was lucky that my book was picked up by the Book of the Month editors, that they decided here in the US it's this big monthly subscription box kind of. So a lot of people got their hands on the book before it even came out. And a lot of the people who got it were TikTok influencers who they liked romance. It was the romance option in that week, and so they like romance. They read the book. They talked about the book on TikTok. Other people liked it. So sometimes you just really get lucky, and people talk about your book to the right people, and the word of mouth kind of starts. So I don't know that there is. On the one hand, I want to say, oh yeah, it's because it was the perfect book for the perfect time. But on the other hand, I really think that sometimes it's just a matter of coincidence. There are so many amazing books out there that I think could have connected so much with the audiences, but maybe the audiences didn't even know that they were there at the same time. And I know it because I have a lot of people that I debuted with who were, they were with me with the whole publication journey, and then maybe their books didn't get as much attention, and there is a lot of luck that is just part of the publishing process. It's something we can't control.
It is amazing how much TikTok does have an influence in books now. It's extraordinary. Yeah, you had quite an unusual route to get to be published in the first place, because you weren't necessarily trying to be a published author. So can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I was really intrigued by that story.
Yeah, I was really lucky and really privileged, actually. I was writing fan fiction, and my agent came across my fan fiction, and she had been looking for, my agent was predominantly a young adult agent, but she had been trying to, do more romance, but, she knew what she was looking for, and she also kind of happened to like the same Star Wars fan fiction that I wrote. So it was a very coincidental / lucky / right place, right time type of thing. Kind of the success of the book. And what happened was that she just read my fan fiction, and she was she just reached out to me on Twitter. She was like, I'm an agent, and if you ever want to rework one of your fan fictions, we can talk about it because I really think that it might be something that I could help you with, and that traditional publishing might be receptive to. So yeah, it was again a lot of luck, a lot of privilege. I also got really lucky. I really like my agent. She's the best, honestly. She is. I like her. I like her as an agent. She is a very good partner for me. She's someone that I can go to and tell her my ideas, tell her what I feel uncomfortable with, what I like, what I think I'm good at, and she is incredibly helpful. She's also I like her as a person. She's amazing as a person, which is, it doesn't hurt to feel it's such a close relationship between agent and client, and you have to trust someone, and yeah, my agent's just the best. So I love her,
And so in that first book, they were, you originally started with writing about characters from Star Wars. And so can I ask finally then, what are you working on now?
Right now, I am writing my fifth book. Publishing is kind of, it's really unexpectedly, the timeline of everything is much different from anything that I had expected or experienced before, in the sense that you have to kind of turn in your book about a year and a half before the book comes out. I have to say that, I'm working on my on my fifth book, and I am hoping to be able to say more soon, but I think we're at a stage where I'm writing it and my editor hasn't approved it yet, so it might be possible that a lot of the stuff that I'm writing right now might change in the future based on her direction. So yeah, I'm just writing my fifth book. But my next book to come out is going to be, I actually have my 3 novellas that came out in ebook and in audiobook are going to come out as an anthology in January. I think both in the UK and in the US. I think January 3rd. And then my next full-length book is going to be Love Theoretically, which is the story of a theoretical physicist and an experimental physicist who, of course, each think that their discipline is better, and they are brought together by the fact that she applies for a job in the department where he teaches, but something that kind of influences and that plays a big part in the story is the fact that for the past year or so, she has been fake dating his brother. So he knows her as a completely different person because she kind of built a whole identity based on what she thought would be the perfect fake girlfriend for his brother. And he finds out that she's a completely different person. And so it's basically a funny twist on the fake dating trope where she ends up not with the person she's fake dating, but this time she ends up with the brother of the person she's fake dating. So I'm excited for people to read it, and I hope they will like it.
I really enjoyed speaking with Ali. She was such fun and so interesting. You could see that when she got onto the topic of neuroscience, and particularly about this passion of hers about this generalized exam that students have to go through to study at graduate level. She just gets really overexcited about those topics and can't stop chattering away. So what a fun character, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of her books. They were such good fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't imagine a STEMinist rom-com ever really making it onto my to-read list. But when you hear an author that's so passionate and so exciting, how can you not? It's going straight on my to-read list. I'll be looking that up any second.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a fun read.
And moving on to the second part of this episode, we speak to Lily about life at the libraries that she works at and a few of her recommended reads, of which she really has a good spread. So let's get into it.
Hi, Lily, and welcome to the Love Your Library podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So you're a library team assistant for Hampshire Libraries. Could you tell us a little bit about your role and where you work?
So my main base is Waterlooville, but I actually am an annualised hours library team assistant. So what I do is I travel to about 5 different branches close to Waterlooville and provide cover. So I get to see lots of different people in all different branches. So it's good fun.
So, on to our book recommendations. Lily, would you tell us a little bit about the book you've chosen and why you chose it?
So I've chosen The Heart Goes Last by Margaret Atwood. It was the last book that I read, actually, but I really enjoyed it. It was a book that I picked up while I was at work, and initially I put it back because it was on the science fiction shelf, which is not a genre I particularly like or am drawn to often. But I decided by the end of the day to go back take it home and just give it a go and see what it was like. And I actually ended up really enjoying it.
So what's the story about?
So it's about a couple, Charmaine and Stan, who are living on the fringes of society. There seems to have been some sort of dystopian near future, but it's not made entirely clear. And they're recruited into a program which gives them the opportunity for what they think is a better life.
Yeah, it is interesting, the idea of genres like that with something with a science fiction tag. It's like I would generally think, oh, I'm not into magical books. But sometimes the genres can be really misleading, and often it is just somewhere to tell a story, and having it as a science fiction or something in the future just enables her to sort of talk about different themes that something set in the present day wouldn't allow you to do. So did you feel that it was a science fiction? Did it make you more tempted to try other science fiction?
It actually has. It's not science fiction in the sense of aliens and being on a different planet or anything like that, but dystopian feel to it was similar to stuff that I'd read before, but now it sort of made me want to read more science fiction, even if that would be something more mystical or less grounded in reality than that was.
Yeah, I find that with both books and films, is that often science fiction can really surprise me for just giving me ideas and new ways of looking at our world that you wouldn't have had before. So is this the first Margaret Atwood book that you've read, or have you read others of hers?
No, so I read The Handmaid's Tale a few years ago. I studied it as part of my A-level, and I hadn't read any more after that just because I didn't think that I would have liked her other things, looking at the blurbs and things like that. No, it's definitely made me want to read more and explore her as an author, because I think novels provide quite a wide range of perspectives on different issues that can be applied to modern day, even if they're set in a near future or another society. I think it's all very real and applicable.
It's very plausible. Yeah, I mean, particularly with Handmaid's Tale, which is the one I've read of hers most recently, you know that everything that's happening in that book is happening somewhere in this world as we speak. So even though she's constructed a world of the future, it is still so much of it you can just relate absolutely to stuff that's going on. Yeah.
I think that's almost the beauty of a sci-fi or fantasy book, because you can just kind of set it anywhere, at any time, any place. Sky's the limit, really. It means that you can explore those social structures and themes in ways where you don't have to worry about it being realistic or plausible in a kind of, you know, there might be a dragon there, or there might be a talking, you know, a robot companion or something like that. You know, you can really get creative with that genre, I think, as a writer, which is amazing. So what kind of books and what kind of genres do you like, Lily, if sci-fi isn't initially your thing?
I mean, most recently I've been reading a lot of contemporary Japanese fiction. I find that quite interesting. I think the way that Japanese authors write is a lot different to like a lot of the English and American authors that I've read, and just the way that they construct stories. They leave a lot more up to the reader. Mainly I read a lot of things to do with social issues, of like family dramas, things like that, things that are very much grounded in reality or quite plausible.
I was going to say, are there more Japanese writers available now to read, translated into English?
Yeah, there's quite a lot actually. And with the way that translation is now and how accessible that is with technology and communicating with people, it's meant that the genres picked up quite a lot over here, and with English speakers. So that's been quite nice, and it's just been nice to almost explore another culture through writing and fiction.
It definitely expands your worldview, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, yet again, it just shows with reading how you can just live a million lives through books. And yeah, really interesting that you were saying about how much that Japanese writers maybe let the reader work out more for themselves and use their imaginations in that way. I wonder whether that's linked to their poetry, or what, how that's emerged as a particular something that stands out with Japanese writers?
I can give you some book recommendations. Yeah, Convenience Store Woman. That was a really good read. It was really quick as well. I think it was under 200 pages. So if you're just starting out, it's quite easy.
And is that one, do you think you could get at the library?
Yes, yeah, I've seen a few copies.
Excellent.
Hanging about, so it is very accessible. And I think the author actually has a new novel called Earthlings, which I've not read yet, but it had very good reviews.
So interesting. I think there's this kind of cultural, in the entertainment sphere, there's definitely a higher presence of the kind of East Asian, TV shows, films, books.
Yeah. All of the culture is becoming really, I've noticed among sort of young people that I know, they're really being seized by of interest in films and books from places like Japan and South Korea, particularly being influential nowadays.
I think things like Netflix probably make it 10 times easier to access TV shows and films from around the world. And once you've kind of got those in your mind, you might be thinking as a reader, what stories are out there, what else can I kind of dip into from this culture that's just across the entire world. You can access it immediately by a book or by a program.
And I guess if publishers can see that something like the Squid Games, which is a South Korean TV series, can be so popular in the mainstream, then hopefully that'll give them more confidence to start sharing books with us that are from different cultures as well, because I think we are more open to it too. We've been talking about The Heart Goes Last by Margaret Atwood. Hattie, what book did you want to talk about today?
Well, staying very on theme, I think I'm going to talk about a book that, if you are familiar with Margaret Atwood, you probably are familiar with this book as well. No, it's not The Handmaid's Tale, but it is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which is The Testaments. So this was a book that came out in 2019, which is, I think, 34 years after it was first, after The Handmaid's Tale was released. So a huge gap. And it's set 15 years after the events that occur in The Handmaid's Tale, and kind of, covers from a different perspective what's going on at that time in the fictional land of Gilead. So again, it's kind of that dystopia. I would say there's sci-fi elements of it. And for me, this is a really interesting book because it kind of had so much hype. It was so popular even before it had been released. I think it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize before it had even been released. And it did go on that year to win it with Bernardine Evaristo for The Testaments, and then Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other one as well. So yeah, it's also been released right in the middle of the kind of hype around the TV show that's come out too, which I really enjoy as well. That's a different take on the classic story. And I think it's quite conscious of it. I think it's definitely a book that knows its place in the 2019 and early 2020s kind of landscape. I think it's to the point where it brings in elements of the TV show to familiarize readers or viewers, I guess, with it, which I think is quite an interesting way to handle it. And even to the point where Anne Dowd, who plays Aunt Lydia in the TV show, is the voice of the Aunt Lydia in this 15 years on look at it too. She's a perfect, and that's on the audiobook version of it, I should say, which is how I consumed it on my commute back in the day. But yeah, even though it was a popular book at the time, and I think sometimes as a reader you might be a bit resistant to that popularity, and especially when something's kind of at the height of the kind of storm of popularity around it, it's still a really good book. It's different from the original. I've seen a few negative reviews about it saying that it lacks the gravitas of the original, which, if you haven't read The Handmaid's Tale, is a pretty harrowing story about futuristic society that uses fertile women's wombs as chattel, really, and kind of they keep them almost just for breeding, and they're treated really horribly, and it's all to do with a really awful, just a terrible view of how to kind of further society by just addressing underpopulation in a kind of abusive and controlling way. This doesn't quite have the same emphasis on that element of it. I think, it acknowledges that side of things has been handled, but then it comes in and is a much more action-driven plot. It's a bit more of a thriller. It definitely goes towards a resolution, which is, for people who might have felt that The Handmaid's Tale ended without that resolution in place and wanted something a bit more to happen, this is definitely a much more exciting book to read, I think. But yeah, and also I think the seriousness, the gravitas is still there. It's just there differently. You've got a shift in perspective. The story is told from two different or a few different characters' perspectives, and they're different. So yeah, well, it's hard to not spoil it, but it's very good. I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I remember reading it and just feeling it was a real adventure romp. You were it was a real page turner because you were excited to see what was going to happen next, on the edge of their seat. Are they going to make it or not? And all this kind of daring do, which I kind of wasn't really expecting. And it is much more ramped up in this than I'd remembered from The Handmaid's Tale. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. She's such a great writer. Is it, Lily, have you read The Testaments?
No, I haven't. And I'm actually glad that you've said what you've said about it, because I was a little bit, I didn't want to spoil The Handmaid's Tale almost, especially as you were saying, there was so much media hype, and I was a little bit worried that I would be disappointed and let down after having really enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale for what it was. So no, I think that's definitely going to be on my to be read list.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I did really enjoy it. So yeah, we've been talking about another Margaret Atwood book, The Testaments, which came out. It came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago.
2019.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I am going to pick. I've picked a book that is on theme, but it's not another Margaret Atwood book. It's a book called The Power by Naomi Alderman that came out in 2016, and it actually won the Women's Prize for Fiction that year. Its central premise is that women have developed this ability to kind of release electric shocks through their fingers, and it gives them this incredible power, as the titles alludes to. And I've picked it because there's some really close connections with Margaret Atwood, particularly with The Handmaid's Tale, particularly with The Testaments as well. Margaret Atwood acted as a kind of mentor for Naomi Alderman for this book, and I think she did even suggest plot points. But possibly even more than that, I think having this mentor relationship, you really feel that Naomi Alderman is kind of giving, not a pastiche, but sort of honouring the tradition of Margaret Atwood stories. So you can see it's the sort of influence shining through. So with the structure of The Powers, it's a book within the book, and so it's kind of bookended beginning and end as academics in the future looking at these stories of these women, of this extraordinary phenomenon that happened, and exploring it as academics. And that had echoes with the sort of framing, or at least some of the ending of Handmaid's Tale. But I think more specifically, it's all about exploring the sort of gender, the power imbalance with genders, and because everything becomes turned on its head totally with the power that women get given. But then it's kind of not saying, hey, first of all, you're kind of going, yay, patriarchy overthrown. But then you realize, actually, when women have got the power, it's just as bad. It's just power that is the negative, rather than necessarily within genders. I would say it's a kind of little bit of a mismatch. I don't know whether either of you have read it and whether you feel the same. A little bit of a mismatch of genres in that, is it political? Is it action? Is it even kind of a young adult novel? But in some ways that did remind me of Testaments, because it is, you do, a lot of it is, and they're going to do this and this is going to happen, and are they going to make it? So it does turn into a real action thriller as well. But it's one I did really enjoy reading, and does give you does give you some thoughts and ideas, as we were saying a science fiction book can do, taking an idea and seeing what happens, what are the consequences of this happening. So Hattie, you've been nodding your head. Is The Power something that you've read as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you might have recommended that to me quite soon after we first met, actually, walking around a library. And I have to say, I really, really enjoyed that. That was one of the books, just a book that I really did enjoy. I completely agree with you in terms of that it's hard to pin it down to a genre, but interestingly, it almost gave me a bit of a sense of like the Hunger Games kind of essence as well, in that kind of action-driven. Is very accessible, so I would say it's definitely appropriate for a YA audience, and it is really interesting. I think you have to read it to feel the details of it, obviously, but the idea about power being the corrupting force, very well handled, I think. Have you read it, Lily?
No, I haven't, no, but I definitely am going to after this conversation. I think it's quite interesting what you were saying about it being difficult to pin down to a genre, because I think that is similar with a lot of Atwood's work as well, and especially with The Handmaid's Tale and The Power, where it is a sort of feminist voice in a way, having the political undertones and also having a genre like science fiction or fantasy, it makes it easier to explore. But I think it's just interesting how all of these books, even though they might not be set in our day, it's very plausible. And with everything in the news recently, I think it's some great talking points and thinking points as well.
Yeah, definitely. We, as Hampshire Libraries, we're part of the Empathy Lab project, which is run by Libraries Connected. Every year, Empathy Lab run Empathy Day, and this is a reading exercise for children to feel more, to develop skills of empathy and stuff like that. And I think for me, what a lot of people are turned off by with dystopia in particular is that, it's all doom and gloom, it's really horrible, everyone's miserable, it's terrible. But I think that for me, it's one of my favourite genres. So I'm so excited that we've been able to talk about it in so much depth. But I think that understanding those harrowing things that people go through and absorbing them as a reader makes you feel a stronger sense of empathy towards everyone, because you can being able to put yourself in someone's shoes when they're going through something, even in a fantasy land or in a dystopian future. It means that you're more sympathetic when horrible things happen in our society. And I think that that's the kind of thing that reading really prepares you for.
It is interesting that there is quite a lot of research that shows how much people will develop empathy skills through reading, because as I mentioned earlier on, through books, you live other people's lives in a way you never get to do in real life. And that somehow it is much more immersive than watching a film or watching television. It's you do immerse yourself in the story so much more.
And before we go then, Lily, are there any other books that you'd like to give a special mention to?
I mean, most recently I read Harmony by Carolyn Pankhurst, which is completely different to anything that we've spoken about today. But that was quite an interesting read. It focuses on a family who have a child who has an autism diagnosis and navigating that through going to a summer camp. And lots of different things happen. It's very action-packed and page-turning, and my mouth is on the floor some of the time. It was just absolutely, it was an amazing novel.
There's no better endorsement than the phrase, my jaw was on the floor. So I think that's going straight on my to-read list. I've just made a little note.
Thank you so much, Lily, for your contribution and for those recommendations, which has got us all with our fingers ready to go and look them up on the library catalogue straight away. So thank you so much, and we really enjoyed having you, and I hope you'll join us again.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been amazing, and hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
That was great. So many writers and so many books that I've never even heard of before. You know, sometimes you actually ask me where I get my recommendations from, Kate. And to be honest, all the research for this podcast and conversations with our library teams is the perfect place to kind of start digging for those recommendations.
It is absolutely true. If you're ever stuck for a book to read, then go into your library and ask the people working there. They just are such a mine of information with brilliant recommendations. And they're really good too. If you say, oh, I like this book and this book, they may well know of authors that will be similar and that you'll love just as well, but you might not have heard of. Well, lovely to chat with you, Hattie. But that's us for today, and I look forward to seeing you for the next time we get together to talk about books. Thank you very much to lovely Ali and to Lily and our supporters Borrowbox, and of course, thank you very much for listening. I'm Kate Price McCarthy,
and I'm Hattie Dulat.